Welcome to Peeling Back the Layers, Citing Sources from Online Materials, Part 2. My name is Diana Elder. I'm an accredited genealogist, and you can find more about me on FamilyLocket.com. The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong solely to the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views of Family Search International and Roots Tech. As I mentioned in Part 1 of this series, source citations falls in the genealogy research process as a critical part. And as we have created an objective for our research project, and we've analyzed our sources, learned about the location, we've created a research plan, and we're finally to the research stage, and we have our research log open, and we are looking at our sources. We want to make sure that we are creating those source citations the first time we look at the sources. So when we come to writing our conclusions or sharing our research, we have a source citation to back up everything that we've learned about our people and to provide some proof of our work, which is what we all want, right? So just to review, layered citations is a term coined by Elizabeth Shown Mills, and it describes digital sources that contain digital images of original records. And the reason I like to use this term layered citations is I think it helps us to understand easier how to create these types of citations. Because we use so many online sources, it's critical that we understand how to create a citation that's clear and consistent and can help us get back to the record as well as anyone else. Let's get to it. Let's talk about creating a source citation. How is this done? The first thing to understand is that we need to understand the source. We have got to know what we're looking at if we're going to have any kind of a hope of creating a good source citation for it. So in the part 1 of this series, we talked a little bit about this World War I draft registration card, which is found on Ancestry.com. This is for my great-grandfather, Doc Harris. And we can, of course, look through the card, read all the information, and really try to understand what the source is telling us. But we also need to understand where the source came from. And the only way we can do that is by clicking around on the website. Now, one of the things to note on Ancestry is if you look right above the image, we see the name of the collection right there, U.S. World War I Draft Registration Cards for Doc Harris, and we get some information about the place. So this can be good information that you can use in creating your citation. That's a little tip that I have for you for Ancestry, is to use that information located above the image and maybe move that around a little bit, but it will give you some of the good basic details. Now, to understand the source, make sure you look at all the provided details. And we went through this in some detail in part 1 of this series, but notice, just for review, that the source citation, the information, and the original data all contain some good information, but none of it is complete enough for a good source citation. So we're going to want to do a little bit more with this information now that we understand that this source came from the National Archives and that Ancestry's created a collection for it, and that it came originally from Oklahoma and Love County. So many moving pieces of this source. So to create our citation, when we're working with a physical and a digital layer, we can separate those out, and it can be helpful to show that. So in the next few examples, I have the digital layer and the physical layer separated out, and I'm going to show you the 5 questions and how I answered them for each one of these layers and explain my reasoning. And I want you to remember as we're going through this that citation is an art, not a science, quoted from Elizabeth Shown Mills, and you may choose to do this a little differently. I'm just showing you a method that I have used and that works well for me, and maybe it will work well for you as well. Here are those 5 questions. We want to create our citation by answering these. Now this seems simple enough, right? Answering the who, what, where is, when, and where in. But when it comes to layered citations, do we answer the who for both layers? What is the when for both layers? So it makes it even more complicated when we are using different layers for a citation. So we're going to look at some thoughts on this. Let's start our discussion about answering the 5 questions with the question of who created the source. This is the author of the source or the creator. So this is often a religious or a government entity when we're talking about genealogy type records. In this example of the World War I draft registration card, the who is shown in bright red. And because the first layer is the digital layer, Ancestry was the creator of the digital layer. Ancestry put together this collection of World War I draft registration cards. Now, the National Archives put together a physical layer in the microfilm publication. And so I have the digital layer first, I have the physical layer second. If we wanted to go to the National Archives, we could see this original microfilm that was made of these individual draft registration cards. Now let's talk about the what. The what is, if it's a published work, it would be the title of the book, the article, the journal. It could be a website. If it's unpublished, it could be a personal history or an interview, a collection of loose papers, a birth registration book. So many different things that could be the what. In our example here, the what is in brown. The what is the title of the collection. This is the U.S. World War I draft registration cards, 1917 to 1918. And then I've also added the information that it's the entry for Doc Harris. So this is an important piece of the what that is often missing in citations that are very generic on some of the websites, because they obviously can't go in and create a nice citation for each individual record. Often they'll use a generic one for an entire collection. And so it's up to us as researchers to go in and add the extra details about the what. Now, how about that physical layer of the National Archives microfilm? Well, we don't need to duplicate information, so we wouldn't need to put again that this was an entry for Doc Harris and that it was the draft registration cards. We simply just need to cite the information shown there, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. But think about that when we're doing a layered citation, we don't have to duplicate any of the information because sometimes one place is fine. And in this case, the digital layer shown first explains completely the what is the source. Now, to answer the question of when, we have to look at when the source was created or when the event happened. And sometimes we use both. If we are using a published source like a book, we just put the year of publication. If it's a journal or a magazine, we can add the month or the season. If we are looking at a website, we can add the access date. And we always want to add the date that we looked at that website. URLs can change, and knowing the date that we looked at it could help us if we're going to use the Wayback Machine on Internet Archive to find that record again. It can also help us to know if we have searched that website lately or that collection lately, because perhaps new records have been added since we last looked at the date. Then, if it's an unpublished source, we can use the date it was created or the date of the event it reports, or both. So these are all scenarios that we will run across as we're doing our layered citations. As more and more people upload information, we could have an interview uploaded to a website that we'll want to use, and it would be unpublished, and we'll have to figure out a way to cite that. And if we can at all figure out a date on any of those, it will help us to answer the question of when. When we want to answer when the source was created or when did the event happen, with our example, we have 2 dates that we can put into our citation. First, we can put the date for the actual record. And this draft registration card was dated 1917. And then the date that I looked at it on Ancestry was December 21st, 2020. And so both of those dates give me information. I get information about when this card, the source, was recorded and when I actually accessed it. When we talk about where is a source located, we're talking about a place of publication if it's published. If it's a website, that place is a URL. That's where we can actually locate it. If it's an unpublished source, this is where the source can be viewed. And an example of this would be a personal letter that only you have, and physically it is in your files, but perhaps you've uploaded that to Family Search or to Ancestry and someone else is using that in their research report. So they'll be creating a layered citation with both the physical location in your files and the digital location where they looked at it on an online tree. In our example, the where is the source located is answered in the digital layer with the URL of Ancestry. And notice that in this example, I have just the basic URL of ancestry.com. I haven't put the specific URL pointing directly to this record. The reason is this is a record that is easily located by going to that collection. It's indexed. I could simply put in the name of Doc Harris and I could find it again really quickly, as could anyone else. Now, let's think about another scenario where perhaps you have found a source on a website and you don't know if that website will be around very long or if they will maybe rearrange their records, and in that case you might want to have the complete URL, which, as I mentioned before, you could use on the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. You'd put in the complete URL and the date, and you would be able to go back and find that actual website and that web page as it was created or as the Wayback Machine took a picture of it on that date. And so you have to be judicious in thinking about what you want to do for the URL. If you want to use just the website URL and then have enough pieces of information that someone could get back to it easily, or if perhaps you need to also do a more complete URL. Just something to think about, and there's no right or wrong answer. Again, this is an art, not a science, and it's up to us to use our brains to think about what would work best. Now notice in the physical layer that we have National Archives is where the source is located. And if we wanted to go to Washington, D.C. and look at this original microfilm, it would be at the National Archives. So that answers the question of where. Now, when we're thinking about where in the book, film, magazine, database, etc. is the source located, then we're thinking about really specific details. For instance, if this is a book, a published source, then we want the page number of the book that piece of information came from. Or maybe we need the volume number. If it's an online database and we have been browsing microfilm, perhaps we need to have an image number, or maybe we need waypoints. Maybe we need something helping us to go deeper into the film or the website till we get to the actual place the source we are looking at is located. So we have to think about how we would guide someone who is trying to get to that place we are looking at through our source citation. Wherein can also be something like a government certificate, a document number for a government certificate, especially if we are using a website and that's how things are organized, is by document number. Something that can really help when we're thinking about the where in is how that database is organized. Is it organized alphabetically? Is it by date? Is it by location? Is it by number? And by thinking about how it is actually organized, that will help us to figure out the type of information to answer the where in question. So in our example, what do we have? Well, I've put some waypoints there. And if I were browsing this collection on Ancestry, I could start with the basic collection, then I could go to Oklahoma, then to Love County, and then to the H's to find this entry for Dot Harris. And so you'll see there in green the specifics about where in this is. And down in the physical layer, you'll see that we have a specific publication number for M1509, which is the record group at the National Archives. So at the National Archives, if I were to visit there physically, there could be perhaps some additional physical information I could put for the where in, but in this case, the only information I have provided by Ancestry is the record group. And so we do the best with what we have, and we try to include enough information in the citation in either the physical or the digital layer that we can relocate that source. So you'll notice that I did not repeat Oklahoma and Love County in the physical layer for the National Archives. Again, there's no need to be repetitive. If we've got the basic information in one of the layers, then we don't need to add it to the other layer. Let's stop and think about punctuation. Punctuation is really important in our citations. And you may get confused. You may think, why do I need to bother? This is just one step I don't want to worry about. But it's really pretty simple. And once you get used to it, you get the hang of it and it becomes second nature. So let's just go through these, and I'm going to show you our citation without punctuation and with. Quotation marks. These are around a collection title. So many of the websites use collection titles. So it's simple. Put quotation marks around it. Think of it as a chapter title in a book, which is something else that we would put quotation marks around. So think of the entire website as a book. It's a publication. And then think of the collections within the website as chapter titles, and quotation marks go around them. Now parentheses. The style guides have publication information within parentheses. And so if you think about it, the website is a publication, and so that's why we put the URL and the access date within parentheses, because it's the publication. If we were citing a book, we put the publisher and the date of publication and place of publication also within parentheses. Semicolons are an important thing to remember with a layered citation because it separates the layers of the citation. The colon, the two little dots, separates parts of the publication information. A comma separates each part within the layer, and then we put a period at the very end, which signals the end of our great citation. All right, without punctuation, here is the citation that I drafted for that World War I draft registration card. Now you'll notice as you're just glancing through this, you really have no idea what the collection is because there's no quotation marks around it. You're not really sure about publication. There's no parentheses. There's no semicolon signaling an online layer or signaling the digital or physical layer. There's really a lot of problems. It's like reading a paragraph or a sentence without any punctuation. Now let's look at with punctuation, and I put those in blue and bolded them so you can see clearly. Just look how much better that is. Now we have got the online collection clearly denoted in the quotation marks, and we have the comma inside the quotation marks per our style guide. And then we have the little sideways caret showing basically waypoints or, drilling down into a collection. We have got the publication with the URL and the access date within parentheses, and then there's that semicolon, which signals that we are now going to the physical layer. We've completed the digital layer, now we have the physical layer, and then we have the period which shows that we're done. This is the end of our citation. So we've gone through quite a few things here. Let's just review. Steps to citing a source. We need to understand the source. Then we create the citation by answering the 5 questions: the who, what, when, wherein, and where is. As you are creating your citations, remember, citation is an art, not a science. In part 3 of this series of creating layered citations, we're going to look at 2 different examples from Family Search. One for a record index on Family Search and one for a record that is not indexed or browse only. And these are 2 quite different examples than the one we've looked at here on Ancestry. So I invite you to join me in part 3 of this series. Thank you so much for watching. To learn more about what I teach and what I do, please visit FamilyLocket.com, and we have a special Roots Tech page with some templates for you, information about our podcast, our newsletter, our book, and our courses. Please watch other great content on Roots Tech Connect. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in part 3.